Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opus Well Style podcast. My name is Iván Watanabe, here with my good friend and partner, Evan. Evan, what's going on, man? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Later today, I'm going to play golf with my son and both my parents. I've never played golf with my mom before, so it should be an interesting one.
Wow.
Yeah.
First time playing golf with your mom?
Yeah, she took it up in retirement, and we've been wanting to make it happen for a while, and it's going to happen today. 9 holes.
Yeah, unbelievable.
We're going to try not to hold up the rest of the course.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You got a beautiful day outside today,
It's
so
gonna be a
that's
good
awesome. Awesome. Well, we are really excited to have on a colleague of ours and good friend, Neal Brincefield. Neal is a financial advisor over at Consolidated Planning and has, a multitude of letters after his last name for RICP, CLU, ChFC, CExP, just a tremendous resource for us and a great advocate for his clients. And we're really psyched to have you on, Neal, today.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm pumped.
Absolutely. So today, I saw Neal give a presentation recently on some core financial planning concepts, and we wanted to bring them to the table for our audience to learn a little bit more about these particular concepts. And Neal is probably one of the most eloquent presenters I've ever seen, and really comes across super clean with the sort of explanation here. So I'm excited to have you, kind of jump on, Neal, and maybe start with your concepts.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. I'd love, if it works for you guys, I'd love to start with just a discussion of the way most people think about retirement income planning and the types of tools that are used, I would say like 99% of the time, and maybe some aspects of that approach that are very rarely like fully understood. If that sounds like a good place to dive in, let's begin right there.
Let's do it.
Perfect. So I'm sure everybody listening has either experienced this themselves, like they've worked with a planner, or they've read an article about it, or you can go online and find a multitude of calculators and engage in like a simulation of what your retirement life could look like. And so that simulation often sounds like, let's put X amount of money into a bucket of a moderate portfolio, pull off 4%, increase that withdrawal by some inflation adjusted factor, and let's see how many times out of 1,000, how many times that approach, that strategy will actually succeed. And that what that's called is like a Monte Carlo simulation. So a lot of people have probably done that. They've experienced it. They've heard the terminology. What I find though is not many people appreciate like what is actually going on behind the scenes and where that approach even came from. And it's kind of a fascinating story in its own right. But does that make sense, guys, just in terms of the premise? And does that sound familiar, I'm assuming, for probably the type of conversations you have as well?
Yeah, certainly what we're interested in. What do you mean by 1,000 possible scenarios? Like how does the system know? Is it just totally random, or what's just generating the different probabilities?
Yeah, so let me do this. If it's all right, guys, I'm going to show on screen an example of this. Yeah, the 1,000 times reference is specifically a nod to this type of statistical analysis that is used almost all the time for testing the quote probability of a retirement strategy actually succeeding. And the name it goes by is Monte Carlo. The 1,000 times, Evan, refers to the idea that this is a simulator that will take a given expected rate of return and a given amount of like volatility or sort of differing sequences of returns, and it'll randomize the returns that have to occur to equal that average return over 25 or 30 years, whatever your time frame is. And then it'll run those randomized trials like 1,000 times and sort of instantaneously behind the scenes. And the output you get, like you see here, is some sort of measurement of either success or failure. Like in this case, 59.46% of those 1,000 runs failed to end with whatever the target amount. In this case, it was $2 million. The target amount needed to be in the portfolio. So there's a lot of statistical firepower behind this, and I think what it often does is give people, understandably, like a sense of confidence. If the numbers look good, a sense of confidence that they've got a plan here that's going to be like really rock solid. and they can move ahead and sleep at night and do all the things we know people want to be able to do when it comes to their retirement plan. Does
So Neil,
that make sense?
just I just want to make sure I'm getting this clearly. So if you're just listening and not watching, go check it out on YouTube. You'll see the visuals. But what we're seeing here is, I guess it's 1,000 lines, jagged. Some are up and to the right, and some are down and to the right. But it looks like at the end there could be a few people that have accumulated a lot of money, and there could be many people that have accumulated either very little or ran out of money. But what you're saying is, and I'm asking you to confirm here, is are all of these lines the same average return, the same investment portfolio and the same average return? Is that right?
Exactly right, Evan. So each one of those lines, and it's not actually 1,000 lines, because if we plotted all 1,000 lines out, it would just be a blob. Yeah, it'd be really hard to discern what's actually going on. So this is a sample of 40 of those 1,000
Gotcha.
like lines. But you're exactly right. Like what each of those lines represents is a different version of the timeline of your life, where you got this 7% moderate portfolio, but you achieve that 7% return in a different order of returns. And so in some cases, the order is really lucky. It's fortuitous. You got great returns up front. You're making withdrawals. Your portfolio is growing. In some cases, it was the opposite. You had like really bad returns up front, and you compounded those returns by making withdrawals. Those are the squiggly lines that end up below zero at the end. The ones where you get really good returns up front, they end up much, much higher. Like this lucky guy here, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see he's like ends with 14 million. And the problem with this, among many problems, is that you don't know what the sequence of returns is going to be. And so the analysis is meant to just give you some confidence to say, well, on average, this could be our result. And now we've got to decide, like, what are we really willing to accept here in terms of what that outcome could be.
Yeah. And, Neal, I know when we had talked previously, you had some general background because we use the Monte Carlo analysis and sort of the thought process behind it all the time. Right. But I thought it would be interesting to share a little bit more about the background behind Monte Carlo. And, I found that sort of be kind of fascinating. So if you wouldn't mind indulging the audience a little bit, that'd be great.
So when as I sort of did the deep dive on this a couple of years ago, I was like shocked to find the origin of the Monte Carlo simulation is really nothing to do with finance. It goes back to the late 1940s, and it's actually from science, like the cutting edge of science. The Los Alamos Laboratory is the location where it was invented, and it's part of the Manhattan Project. For those of you who've like watched the movie Oppenheimer, this is the setting in which the nuclear bomb was developed. And you have it's a great movie, absolutely. And so now when you rewatch it, you're going to have another appreciation for what was going on there. It's as you had thousands of scientists and mathematicians and researchers, like the brightest minds on the planet, working together to solve some of these really like impossible scientific challenges. One of the byproducts of that was this guy named Stanislav Ulam, who was a Polish-American mathematician. After the war, he's recovering from surgery at Los Alamos Laboratory, laying in bed playing solitaire. And because he's a mathematician, he's thinking to himself, like, how could I calculate the probability of winning any one game of solitaire? And that like proved to be a really difficult calculation. Like I couldn't tell you how to begin to do that. And apparently he couldn't figure it out either. What he realized is that the easy way to figure out the probability would just be, if he had the time, he could play 1,000 games of solitaire and record how many times he won. And that's a statistically large enough number that it gives him a reliable prediction of his odds of success in any given game. So he had that idea, and he thought, this actually applies to like the work we're doing at the laboratory. They're trying to figure out the probability of nuclear particles like moving in certain behaviors, and that same kind of simulation could be done at the time because they had the first like personal computers available. And because they had that like computing power, along with this idea of doing these like statistical runs, they basically developed the first Monte Carlo simulations that allowed them to advance their understanding of like nuclear physics in a way that wouldn't have otherwise been possible. So that's actually where that whole idea of the simulator running 1,000 models of something or 10,000 models of a particular set of data to see what the outcome would be. That's where it came from, and that's really where it stayed for decades and decades. It wasn't until the 1970s, 1980s that like quants on Wall Street started using Monte Carlo simulators to assist in options pricing. And it's even later, like think late 90s, when you actually had not the IBM computer that could fill a room, but you had personal computers at home, that the first application of Monte Carlo occurred with personal finance. So there's a long trajectory to finally get to, let's say, late 90s, early 2000s, and all of a sudden the use of Monte Carlo explodes. There is a problem, though. Like the thing that is different, the thing that is totally missing from the personal finance use of a Monte Carlo simulation versus solitaire or nuclear physics is that in solitaire and in nuclear physics, the set of possibilities is fixed. There's only 52 cards in a deck when you're playing solitaire. And so it gives you this closed in, very predictable set of potential outcomes that you can really use Monte Carlo to predict what the outcome will be. It's something as close as we'll ever get to a crystal ball. That is not the case when it comes to personal finance and something like someone's retirement portfolio or their income strategy and measuring the success of that. You've got thousands and thousands of market variables across 12,000 securities in a portfolio. You've got investor behavior. You've got all these things that can't be quantified and are totally like open-ended. It's not as if we use the statistical terminology, it's not a normal distribution of outcomes like you would have in measuring nuclear physics or solitaire. So the problem becomes that even if we use historical data to inform that Monte Carlo analysis, you are dealing with a set of historical data, historical events that'll never be repeated again. It's a statistical analysis and there's some value there, but it's not a prediction anymore. It can't be because we're using something that occurred in the past that'll never be repeated and essentially like replaying the tape again and just like hoping that it'll work out that way. And the one thing we can be assured of is that it's never going to be that kind of an outcome, right? So really rooted in like hard science, but the as it's evolved and the way it's used now, it's really used in a way that's unfortunately, I think not valid in the sense that most people think of Monte Carlo. And it probably gives a lot of people a false sense of confidence about the strength of their plan because it feels like a prediction, but it's definitely not a prediction. So that probably more than you bargained for, Iván, but that is that's the background, the actual true story of how Monte Carlo came to be so widely known as a kind of retirement stress test tool.
Yeah, it's funny because it ends up, in conversations, it ends up being sort of a litmus test or like the benchmark of conversation of retirement security. But you're right, like, it'll never end up exactly the way, that things had performed in the past. And so I know we need to use some level of science or tool to sort of plan going forward. But I agree. I think it may give a false sense of security around this.
This is why I personally, I'm so interested in retirement income planning. I think of it as a puzzle. It's so complex. I mean, even just the retirement income planning industry didn't really exist like 20 years ago. And now it's just like it's a whole thing of itself. And I find that most people haven't given it a second of a thought, right? They're just in their lives, they're accumulating money and assume it will work itself out or it'll figure itself out. Or they just, like I said, they just don't think about it. But one of the interesting things about that Monte Carlo simulation is that you showed, Neal, is it's the same average return, 7 point whatever percent. And so I think most people logically just assume average return, I'll get 7% in retirement, that'll work itself out. And actually, we talked about this on the podcast. Average returns don't really matter when you're taking money out or putting money in. But in this case, in retirement, taking money out, what matters is when you get the positive returns or when you get the negative returns, even if it averages all the same at the end. So it's just such an interesting puzzle that gets more and more complicated the more you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, Ev, is that like our industry in general we are in a lot of the wirehouses or a lot of the other firms out there, the idea is to retain as much of these assets for as long as possible and to give back as little as possible, right? In the form of retirement income. And so the idea had always been continue to accumulate. I'm going to collect the fee on accumulating these assets. And then when they retire, I'm just going to give them back the interest off the portfolio, because then I get to retain the corpus of the investment, charge my fees on that, and then when that person passes away, next generation, I manage the assets for that generation, right? So it's a great retention tool for us on the investment side of the business, right? But the idea has always been, how do we help people sort of spend down and enjoy retirement, in a bigger fashion, right? And I think our philosophy has lended to more successful retirement planning, and then incorporating Neal's conversation about the success of that planning, doubles down on this concept, right? And I just, so that's why I'm really excited for you to kind of dive in, Neal, and share a little bit more.
So I'd love to pick it up right there where you guys has kind of centered the discussion on this idea of the sequence of returns, not necessarily giving you the experience of average, even though your portfolio has an expected average return. Like, you don't get to enjoy average when you're in distribution. You are, let's go back, we'll pull up the visual again, because I think here the squiggly lines are actually pretty helpful. Like, no one is the average. Everyone has their experience. And so you are going to be one of these squiggly lines. And the question is, like, if this is the path, who will you be? Will you be the lucky guy that gets great returns up front? Will you be the unlucky guy that gets maybe some not so great returns up front? The key thing to do, and to avoid that trap, like Iván, you're describing, where you're hoarding assets, you're afraid to withdraw them, whether you want to do it or your investment advisor is saying, don't take out any money. You run into this trap of being afraid of being on the wrong side of volatility that is inherently part of being an investor. So here's where I think it's important to think beyond just this like common model, this conventional model of, well, we've got a bucket of $5 million and we want $200,000 a year. What's the right allocation? Again, back to the Monte Carlo kind of history lesson. It's not a prediction. So if we just change from a 60-40 to a 75-25 kind of an allocation, and all we're really changing is this totally theoretical data set that'll never be repeated again for historical returns, it's just not really telling you much about what could happen. And it's definitely not, it's not doing much in terms of changing what the outcome could be. Better is, let's not just like make a tweak to the allocation, like that tilt to the portfolio. Better is, what if we can make an actual structural change here to the way the income is being generated and the types of like options or control that you have in a given moment. Here again, I think there's like a historical analogy that I've just always found to be helpful for the right way to think about improving performance in retirement. And also, I'll give you the really quick version of the story, guys, but it comes from the world of auto racing. So you probably talk about great movies like Oppenheimer. Another pretty great movie that came out maybe 6 or 7 years ago is Ford versus Ferrari. You guys have seen Ford versus Ferrari?
Watched it on a plane.
That's a great plane movie, no doubt. In that movie, the race that's featured is the 24-hour of Le Mans in France. It's a 24-hour, like, grueling race. And the beauty of the story is, because it's such a long race, it's all about efficiency. And just like retirement, it's like this really long marathon of a race, all about efficiency. Small changes have a huge impact on the outcome. Well, not for the race that was featured in the movie, but if we go back about a decade before that to the early 1950s, one of the car companies that was involved in the 24 hours of Le Mans that had been mediocre at best was Jaguar. Jaguar had entered for like 30 years. They'd entered multiple cars a year. So hundreds of cars have been entered in this race. They'd had only one win in 3 decades. And then all of a sudden in 1953, Jaguar rolled out a technological innovation that no other car had. And Jaguar took first, second, and fourth place, like out of nowhere. And they dominated until the rest of those car companies, caught up and developed the same technology. Do you guys know what the technological innovation was?
I do. So I'll let you I'll let you reveal.
All right, perfect. So we won't give it away. So
Yeah.
the assumption usually is like it's a bigger engine, it's got more horsepower, the car was more aerodynamic, like all things we would logically think of to make the car go faster. But the reality is, it was a better set of brakes. Jaguar developed the first set of four-wheel disc brakes that are basically the types of brakes almost all of us have on our cars today. They're way more efficient, way better at stopping the car fast under great control than the type of brakes that were used previously. So it's counterintuitive because brakes only make the car go slower. That's the only thing they can do. They never make the car go faster. Yet what they do is if you can slow down faster with greater control and get back up to a top speed sooner, you actually increase overall speed by being a better stopper of the race car at a given moment. So that sort of counterintuitive dynamic between the accelerator and the brake is a perfect parallel to the key to making this retirement strategy work, like improve your overall performance. What we don't need is a bigger engine. We don't need like more risk or higher returns. That's not going to improve the scenario here we see on screen. What is actually helpful is brakes, is a better set of brakes, a better path to like stop making withdrawals when the market's going down, to reduce the pressure on the portfolio to have to perform at such a high level all the time. Like little things like that can create a huge degree of improvement in the outcome while still allowing the same amount of income to be generated, but with a lot less risk. So I want to show that, guys. But first, does that all make sense? Like just the concept, the analogy?
Most definitely. We are big subscribers of it. So for sure.
Awesome. So then this will be no surprise. Like here's what I'm going to show you as an alternative. Taking the $5 million that we see on screen in that traditional strategy, we're going to sort of spread this out across a few different buckets. There's almost like two types of breaks going on here, as you're going to see. One, we're going to take $2 million and we're going to use that to acquire guaranteed income. So think like a pension, like Social Security. This is going to be a lifetime annuity that's going to pay a certain amount of guaranteed income that this hypothetical client can never outlive. There's no sequence of returns risk, and a very high kind of a payout at a hypothetical retirement age of about 70 years old. And the other thing we're going to do is take about $1 million of this bucket and we're going to put it into what we call a liquidity bucket, or a true liquidity bucket. Cash equivalents, life insurance, cash value, all examples of stable value assets that when one asset elsewhere is down, like the investment portfolio, I know I can always turn to this stable value bucket of true liquidity. I can make cash flow withdrawals from that bucket instead. I've got guaranteed income reducing the pressure on those withdrawals. I've got the true liquidity bucket that's making it easier for me to be selective about where we make the most efficient withdrawal from. And it's the same amount of overall assets. So that's the dynamic you're going to see coming up on screen in just a moment. And the startling thing is like, it's the same amount of money. It's the same amount of total income, $200,000 net after tax. But it's a totally different outcome. It's like the difference between middle of the pack and first place out of nowhere, like Jaguar, because we've basically eliminated market losses being realized from the investment portfolio during this person's, I think, 25-year retirement in the analysis we're looking at.
Yeah, just for those viewing, right? So, or not able to view. So we've got a current scenario with $5 million generating $200,000 of income. And based on an average 7% return, there's a 58.82% failure rate. And so reallocating $2 million to an income producing annuity, $1 million to this true liquidity bucket, and $2 million in that same portfolio, right? The failure rate goes down all the way down to 1.82%, which is same amount of money just by moving the strategy around slightly. Dramatic improvement to the failure rate, right? And the importance behind something like this, when you share this and when you show it, failure cannot be an option in retirement. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know anybody that says I am okay with a 50-50 chance of running out of money in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is most people probably would assume if I just get a better rate of return, take on more risk, that will solve the problem. But what you mentioned, Neal, is you could chase a higher return and maybe that produces a better result, but that also increases the probability of failure because you're increasing the risk. And so what we're doing here is we're taking the same amount of money and just being more efficient with how we're turning those assets into income by creating better breaks like Jaguar did. How'd I do with that?
That's exactly right. Yeah, I love the paraphrase. When you take on more risk in this type of a scenario, especially the current strategy where we see everything's in that investment bucket, you may increase the odds of success, but what you just articulated, I think, is so key as a takeaway is you're increasing the likelihood of, or even the severity of things going wrong. So like the losses are deeper, the volatility swings are higher. It does not make for a comfortable ride. And to that end, I just want to key in on something, Iván, you said. You're talking about like walking into retirement and having this sense of like a 50-50 shot at running out of money or not running out of money. The other thing I think is critical to keep in mind here is that people rarely actually run out of money. Like they rarely actually drive to the end of this retirement, like drive off the cliff at the end, like totally out of money, exhaust all their bank accounts, but they had a great ride up until that point. What I find is like life changes way before you run out of money. Life changes the moment you're afraid of running out of money. And that for a lot of people, that's like the first day of retirement.
Yeah.
Because the plan is so shaky, they're always worried about it. And they end up making changes today, like for the worst. They have a lower income, they live a smaller life. You don't have to run out of money to have retirement ruined. You just have to be afraid that that's a possibility.
Yeah.
They're scared to spend.
You got to have a strong strategy up front.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because, if I were to invite, I don't know, every retiree I knew, and I said, listen, you could get an average 7% rate of return on your portfolio. Would you run out of money? And would you be okay with that as your strategy? We're going to build a portfolio design. You're going to get an average 7% rate of return on your portfolio. I think most people would sign up for that and feel as though that was a comfortable, solid strategy. You know what I'm saying? Because most people are reading out there that withdrawal rates should be, closer to 3.5%. So if I'm taking out 3.5%, but my portfolio is earning an average of 7%, sign me up.
That's right.
Without realizing that there's a significant chance of failure within that model. And I just think some people don't even know to be worried about their current strategy in retirement.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's a classic case of like money not being math. There's a phrase that we hear ourselves saying often. You experience this, you live it. So it's not a theoretical exercise. It's not a math problem. You're going to get the experience that you get, and that 7% return, 3.5% withdrawal, that delta, that only works in a linear fashion. It only works when we're looking at like the biggest picture. It never works in practice because it's not going to be your experience. You're going to have your returns, you're going to have your withdrawals, and that result could put you on the lower half, of the blue line here for the two analyses we're looking at. That's a possibility no matter what you do. So we'd rather be in a position where even your worst case scenario still produces like a positive result at the end. Because you only get one life to live, and you're just way too late by the time you realize you have a problem to go back and change horses.
And the safe withdrawal rate it changed, like the actual safe withdrawal rate that you could pull off of your assets and not run out of money changes from year to year with all the different variables like we started talking about of where are interest rates and taxes and inflation. Are you going to have a spending shock like long-term care? But you don't know what that will be unless you're looking backwards. Right. And so that's why everyone's going to be scared if you don't have proper strategy in place. That's why you will be scared to spend your money, because you don't know if the right number was 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And so don't spend too fast and live too long, because that's not going to work out.
Not going to work out. And Evan, even to your point, like you read the headlines in the Wall Street Journal, Morningstar, or whatever group says the safe withdrawal rate this year is X. That statistical result is a product of this same type of Monte Carlo analysis that we're doing right now. So if we remember back to our history lesson, it cannot be a prediction. It cannot be a crystal ball. So it's just not something that I think is a productive way for anybody to think about how they're going to like move into, live in retirement. You just can't be relying on that, and you can't be adjusting your lifestyle that much. It's a really hard thing to do, not to mention an uncomfortable thing to have to do in retirement. And it just reminds me as well, like Monte Carlo, like we talked about earlier, that analysis is not a crystal ball in the world of finance. It cannot be. So even here, we're not saying that your future, if you go down the current strategy, is 58% of the time you run out of money, or in the alternate, 1.8% of the time you run out of money, because neither of these could ever be a valid or accurate prediction of the future. But what they are is a great stress test where we can say, all things being equal, which of these two strategies seems to be more resilient? Even if it's not a prediction of the future, we can just see that alternate strategy, the balanced approach, is way more resilient. It's a tougher strategy. It's more likely, therefore, to succeed, whatever the future market possibilities are, than the current strategy that clearly it just doesn't hold up as well. Even though it's not a prediction, we can still see what its behavior might be.
Yeah, from a product standpoint, it's funny because oftentimes I'll have a conversation with folks, and people seem to be very romantic about the product that they are using potentially for their investment solutions. And so, I'll have some folks that come to me and they think that annuities are the greatest thing they've ever seen, and some folks that come to me and they say they'll never buy an annuity. And then you start to describe the features of the way this thing will be incorporated into their plan and the improvement on the efficiency of the retirement. And most of the time people sort of change their tune, because once we get away from the actual name of the product and we start to discuss what it actually does for somebody, I think folks, again, just hopefully understand over time after they've been explained. But so for the listening audience, if you have a sort of a bias one way or the other, I invite you to kind of look in a little bit deeper and try to remove the biases if it's possible.
I find, Iván, that's totally true. The group that is the quickest to change their mind on that perception of like, I just heard annuities are bad. I read this article, or I talked to this person, I'm like not interested. I find the group that changes their mind the most quickly are my clients who are already retired. They're living off their portfolio, and they go through a moment like we had here in the kind of first quarter. We've got the Middle East conflict that's really causing this like seesaw effect in the market. That guaranteed income that has zero volatility, that looks pretty attractive now. That's the safe play, as opposed to like staying in the market and kind of ride that out. So I think what's helpful is to try to like get in the time machine mentally, fast forward. What is it going to look like and feel like when your quality of life is determined by the way you derive that cash flow? Like, how much risk do you want to take with that? I find that is sometimes a helpful thing to reframe that.
Yeah, to like a similar extent, it's funny, you mentioned cash value being in that true liquidity bucket. And I think about the conversations I oftentimes, mostly with physicians for some reason, I know they're reading a lot of interesting articles about whole life insurance.
Interesting.
Well, I'll call it interesting. But, it's funny to me because I think about this, and my comment to them is, it's like saying that propofol is bad. Well, yeah, propofol is bad if you're Michael Jackson, but propofol is not bad if you are, having surgery, right? So it's just about the utility of the actual product and how it's incorporated into everything else kind of going on. So the context matters. So I'm curious, from your take as to why, or if you have an opinion of whole life insurance and the cash value being a better true liquidity asset versus cash.
Yeah, to me, I love the propofol analogy because it's all about context. Like context matters. So that none of these things exist in a vacuum in people's lives. And if we do it that way, if we look at any product in a vacuum, it's really easy to pick it apart and say, I like this, I don't like that. I would do this, or I would never do that. When they're put in context, when those those pieces of the puzzle go together to build a strategy, that's where I find those concerns kind of melt away, because you just see the effectiveness of all of those elements going together. And to your question, whole life as a source of true liquidity, it tends to be like a top contender for that job, because you've got great efficiency when it comes to taxes, because if it's properly managed, you're never getting a 1099. You've got liquidity accessible either through like a policy loan, or you can make a withdrawal. And without a market timing concern, the yield, the internal rate of return of a mature whole life policy is going to exceed cash. It's going to be comparable to what you were hoping to get from fixed income anyway. And that's probably already going to be a part of your portfolio by default. Like, those elements alone make it a great candidate as a true liquidity bucket. I think superior to cash from a yield and tax standpoint. Zero volatility, so it's going to trump fixed income, bond funds, that kind of a thing. And it makes sense to include that as a part of the overall distribution strategy. But like anything else, if it was just about that, if it's just about investments, just about annuity only, like in a vacuum, none of those three products are going to create a powerful strategy. But if we put them together in the right amount, we can see what that result is.
To me, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier of risk, rate of return, et cetera, because retirement planning isn't about your assets. It's about creating cash flow. It's about creating income, right? If I always like to remind clients, if you and your neighbor get to retirement with, maybe your neighbor gets to retirement with 10%, 15% more assets on his or her balance sheet, but you get to spend more money because of the strategies you put in place. Who would you rather be? Would you rather have more money in your bank, or would you rather be able to spend more money? And of course, the answer everyone gives is they want to spend more money in retirement, because that's all that matters in retirement. And so just increasing the rate of return isn't going to give you a better cash flow in retirement, as counterintuitive as that may sound. And so that's like the nuance here is, what are the products and strategies we can put in place that enhances your cash flow at a reduced risk, ideally, as opposed to just, try to get you a better rate of return and be that outlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Neal, we could probably go on for hours, a bunch of, three retirement income geeks over here.
That's right.
But I really, really appreciate the time. As we kind of wrap this up, are there any things that you want to make sure that the listening audience kind of takes away? Any sort of concepts or ideas, or anything you want to make sure that we share before we end?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say this, because I find this to be a helpful framing for people when it's so hard sometimes to settle on, like, what am I going to do? Where is my money going to go? What's the solution? I find that it's helpful to think about the problem you're actually trying to solve. Like, what is my problem? What is my planning problem I'm trying to solve? And when you can clarify that, the solutions generally are pretty easy to like put your arms around. So the problems are, to me, is like, ask yourself, how am I solving the problem of, what if I live a really long time? How am I solving the problem of, what if I have a lot of volatility, especially early on? How am I solving the problem of inflation, taxes? When we start to just tackle like those concerns, now the solutions just naturally emerge. And I think what you find is you settle into an outcome that you can feel better about. It doesn't have to be this like pressure to make the right choice of picking the right product. It's almost always going to feel like the right sort of assembly of different products to build an overall strategy. So problem first, solution second. I think that's going to be the best, least stressful path to getting to where you want to go in retirement.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again for the time, Neal. Really appreciate you. And I know, excuse me, I know the listening audience will find it valuable. And thank you to the listening audience for tuning in. Please click subscribe below to be notified when we release our next episode. But again, guys, thank you very much for the time, and I'll see you soon.
This was fun.
Thanks.
Thanks, Neal.